Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our politics panel on how new federal NDP leadership plays in our province. But first, lunar mission significance.
Listening to other people's perspectives on the moon and how different cultures look at the moon. And when we go back, honoring just how humanity, we all share the same moon in the sky, but honoring humans around the world and how they revere the moon.
The crew of Artemis 2, including Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen, gearing up to launch as early as Wednesday evening on NASA's first mission to circle the moon in more than 5 decades. And joining us now, Dr. Shauna Pandya, Alberta-based physician, citizen scientist, and the first female Canadian commercial astronaut. Dr. Pandya, great to see you again.
Yeah,
really appreciate the opportunity to chat at this pivotal point. I'm excited. I have to think you're pretty excited for this launch.
Over the moon excited. This is just an historic mission. It's the first time, as you said, we are sending humans back to the moon, and it is the lead up into what will be a series of missions. And so this is the first time in history, a non-U.S. nation, and it happens to be a Canada, that is sending a human to deep space.
Why is it important to go back to the moon now? How does this register with you as a significant moment in history?
I think the smile betrays the excitement. You know, when we talked about the Apollo days, this was an historic first. It was the cusp, the leading edge of exploration. And now we're picking up on what the lessons learned from Apollo, and we are shaping it into an entire Artemis series of missions with the idea that this will simply be the first in a set of human exploration missions. And the idea is follow-on Artemis missions will pave the way towards future lunar permanent surface operations. So we're not just going back to the moon, but we're going back to stay with a view towards furthering lunar exploration, and then also using the moon as a testbed for Mars.
So reaching much further afield. How different are the danger dynamics in the here and now if we were to dial it back and compare to those Apollo missions those many decades ago?
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime you talk about human spaceflight, there is risk involved. And then the question is, what exactly is the risk? How likely is it? And how severe is it before it happens? And so engineers will recognize this as engineering matrix, risk mitigation. And so we look at likelihood versus consequence. And if it's very, very high, that needs to be mitigated before the mission can go forward. In this case, spaceflight isn't risk-free. This is the most powerful rocket with the SLS that will be sending humans to the moon. This is the first time the Orion crew capsule will be housing humans. So there is still risk, but along the way, at every point, these risks are identified and then mitigated. And this was the reason the entire vehicular assembly was actually rolled back in February with the first launch attempt. So it's sort of what is our acceptable risk envelope? And this time, fingers crossed, weather permitting, looks like all systems are go so far.
To this point, it's only been Americans who've made this journey. But that is about to change with Jeremy Hansen being strapped in. And it's not just Jeremy Hansen. Jenny Gibbons, Calgary-born.
Yes.
She's waiting in the wings to step in if needed. How significant a moment is this where Canada is concerned as, shall we say, a spacefaring nation?
Absolutely. So Canada has always been that reliable, quiet, humble, hardworking partner that shows up and proves its worth. And that's been true in the history of human spaceflight. Canada was the third nation into space with the launch of the Alouette satellite after the Soviet Union, after the Americans, and all along with the International Space Station. We've been a key partner. We helped in the design of the International Space Station. We contributed Canadarm. We will be contributing further robotic arms to lunar exploration. So we've shown up, we've proven our worth, and I think the fact that we've got ourselves a seat to the moon just shows the history of trust, of excellence, and just wanting to take it further.
What about for yourself? Other Canadians, Albertans, who seek a similar journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as some might know who have followed my own journey, I will be going to space as early as late 2026 or early 2027 through the commercial sphere with Virgin Galactic. And, I've grown up watching these guys. I've shared the stage with Jeremy Hansen in Canadian space events. And, to see our nation represented, to see the Canadian flag going to the moon is just, there's this pride point, there's this inspiration point, and it really, for me, cements this bar of excellence as to what it means to be a Canadian in space, and I hope to continue to cement that legacy through my own space flight.
Can you tell us a bit about what that Virgin Galactic flight will entail? I have to think there's a degree of research that's involved with that, motivating the mission.
Absolutely. So through our research institute, the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences, we do research suborbital space flights. We've completed one to date. I was the medical lead and one of the leading ground scientists on that, and now I get to fly myself. I will be flying with two other wonderful women, Kelly Girardi and Dr. Nora Patton, who will become Ireland's first astronaut. Kelly was our first astronaut from our institution. So we've, somewhere along the way, we've unwittingly become the world's first all-female research astronautics crew, which feels pretty cool to say. And we have certain research priority areas in our mission. So we are prioritizing women's health research, neuroscience, health technology, and research that can bring positive impacts back to healthcare on Earth. And so all of that is going on underway. We've done 6 training parabolic flights. So some people may have heard of this
as the Vomit Comet. Waitlist, nice.
Yes, yeah. And so we've been doing that as a crew to make sure that we're on the same page as to how to coordinate and choreograph our operations with the payloads we'll be bringing with us.
Very cool. And if we bring it back full circle to the Artemis missions, what kind of door does that open to space exploration for not just NASA astronauts, but for folks like yourself who dream of that day of reaching beyond Earth orbit? Yeah,
this is just the beginning, truly. With this successful demonstration of the Artemis 2 mission, there's a whole lot riding on this. This is the proof of concept that yes, the SLS, yes, the Orion capsule can support human activities to the moon. And then with that comes the gateway towards Artemis 3, 4, 5, and establishing those permanent surface operations. And who knows, this is just the beginning. Maybe someday I would not say no to a lunar mission myself.
You would not be alone in that regard. There are many of us who would queue up for that as well. Dr. Pandya, really appreciate your perspective on this and what we could expect in the days ahead as Artemis 2 hopefully launches. Thank you
so much for having me.
From federal New Democrats selecting a new leader and the fallout in our province to a UCP MLA penning an op-ed urging Albertans to sign the separation petition. Time now for tonight's politics panel. And joining us this evening, Barry Morishita, former Mayor of Brooks and a former leader of the Alberta Party, and Jim Groom, political scientist, recently retired from Medicine Hat College. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with federal New Democrats selecting Avi Lewis as their new leader and the impact that could have on unity with provincial NDP counterparts, notably here in Alberta.
We don't have to agree on every little thing in order to do big things together.
For many, many years now, the Alberta New Democrats, the federal New Democrats have not been fully aligned, particularly on energy policy.
Now, Lewis won leadership of the party with 56% of the vote, finishing ahead of Alberta MP Heather McPherson. He campaigned on ending federal approvals of new pipelines and natural gas projects while pledging to build a nationwide clean energy grid. Barry, maybe first, what's to be made of the selection of Avi Lewis as leader? What do you feel that says about the direction of the federal NDP as the party attempts to rebuild itself?
Well, I think it's no secret what happened in the last federal election where, the federal Liberals were able to cannibalize a lot of NDP votes, certainly with the situation. But also, I think you saw them expand the tent, it got a little bit wider. And I think Avi Lewis represents even a further to the left group. and they're just trying to find significance in the federal scene. And I think it's a tough place to be right now, considering all that's going on in North America with the United States and with the emphasis on the economies. I think it's going to be a tough place for him to rebuild from, but it does represent a part of society in Canada, and it'll be interesting to see if he can translate it into any political force.
Jim, how do you see Avi Lewis fitting into the federal political dynamic? What kind of impact do you expect he will have, especially as it is? It doesn't seem he wants to seek a seat anytime soon.
No, I think he's going back to the past and trying to be the social conscience of the country, as NDP has always been in the past. And sometimes they are kingmakers when a minority government. Sometimes they are spoilers. And I think the fact that Avi Lewis is elected is the recognition that the NDP will never really aspire to be the government of Canada. They have no expectations in that regard. They will be the social conscience of the country and try as much as they can to eke in a little bit of influence over the other two parties when they are actually in the government. And we'll have to see how that goes. As Barry mentioned, the Overton window is moving further to the right, and the parameters for accepting anyone on the left side of the spectrum is getting less and less tolerant. So I think Avi is a great leader, but I think he's got the wrong approach, the wrong person at the wrong time. And they've got a $13 million debt that they have to clean up first with the NDP. So they're going to have a long, long road before they can actually settle into making any real changes in their positions.
Barry, where do you feel the loss of the leadership race leaves Heather McPherson? Does she become a target of the Liberals, maybe looking to lure another floor crosser?
Well, it is going to be interesting because Heather's energy policy certainly is more in alignment with the provincial views in Alberta, and that's going to be a difficult thing to move forward with in a small caucus like that. And it kind of runs counter to Avi's narrative about, having to move on from carbon fuels. So I think she's got a lot of thinking to do. It's going to be interesting to see how Avi places her. She finished second, so she certainly does command a bit of that 40,000 people that voted or so. And I think she's got a lot of thinking to do. Her political future, though, will depend greatly upon what way the federal NDP goes in the next election. I would think that her political future would be at risk if the federal NDP take on all of Avi's view when it comes to energy.
Now, Jim, what do you make of how quickly Naheed Nenshi and the Alberta NDP were posting online that Lewis's victory is not in the interests of Alberta? How worrisome a time is this for the provincial party?
It could really make him a further target by Danielle Smith, as we've already seen. She's come out and tried to link the two together. If you can bond them together in some way, shape, or form, it's going to be detrimental to Nenshi because we know Lewis is anti-oil and natural gas positions, and if they can tar Nenshi with that, it would be really detrimental. I think he came out so fast. I don't think Lewis had even stopped speaking at his acceptance speech when Nenshi had already come out on social media and said, "Yeah, we're not in line with the federal NDP in this regard."
Barry, if it is that the Alberta NDP continues to distance itself from the federal New Democrats, does there come a point where the provincial party undertakes a rebrand, an identity change?
I think that's really difficult to rebrand in this age. As you know, my experience with the Alberta Party, being a third party or a new party can be very difficult. I think the NDP has done a good job, from Rachel Notley's time on, to start to create that disconnection. At the last convention, the option to not be a part of the federal government federal NDP was initiated into as a policy for the provincial. And I think Naheed did a good job coming out quickly and distancing himself. We see the same thing happening in Saskatchewan, where you have the leader there being very quick, in fact, even refusing to meet with Mr. Lewis on any issue right now. And it can tell you how outsized potentially the negative influence that the federal NDP can have on those provincial races, because those are usually two-horse races in both provinces. And you're going to see a lot, as Jim said, of the current governments trying to link them more directly, because energy policy is a very big issue in the Western provinces. And I can see where Naheed in particular has to be very vigilant about that and continue to press that point. He has nothing to gain by being aligned with Mr. Lewis at this point.
So, Jim, is it likely then that these two leaders are to meet face-to-face anytime soon, or does this just continue to brew?
Well, being open and agreeing to meet is always a benefit, and it also will give the provincial NDP an opportunity to differentiate itself from the Lewis NDP. I mean, it's definitely something that they have to pursue. I think when NG came in, he initially referred to the NDP as the Alberta NDP in order to kind of stress Alberta, which I think was a bit of a change in names. There's been some discussion of name changes, but I think it would be more cosmetic and not very effective. But no, I would anticipate they have to meet because, during elections, they still share the workers. They come from the federal party and the provincial parties, and there's a crossover there that is still beneficial. So they have to do that while still distancing themselves from the leader.
All right, time for us to take a bit of a break, but when we come back, fallout from a UCP MLA's op-ed encouraging Albertans to sign the separation petition. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. The Premier is taking a stance after a UCP MLA wrote an op-ed in support of the separatist petition.
The caucus position and the government position, as passed in law, is that we support a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. And that means a sovereign Alberta remains a province within Canada. Red
Deer South MLA Jason Steffen's comments were published last week in the Western Standard, inviting Albertans to sign the separation petition. The Secretary for Constitutional Affairs writes it would be good for Alberta and says signing the petition for a referendum is different than the vote itself. The Premier says she welcomes diverse opinions in her caucus. Jim, for a UCP MLA to feel comfortable enough to pen such an op-ed, what might that say about dynamics within the governing party's caucus?
Well, I think there's difficulties there for sure. The NDP have all come forward and signed a document that said they're loyal Canadians, et cetera, and they've requested and or demanded that the UCP do the same. And of course, they haven't followed suit because that would be unwise for them to do. And now when we have Steffens come forward here and he's very blatant about the fact that he is a supporter of independence, and it's pretty clear. Now, if he's followed by a number of other members of the caucus, then the Premier is going to have some problems, and she's going to have to call in the whip and ask for some control of the caucus, because this would be a very bad sign if individual members actually started to take her seriously, that they really can speak openly and above board, because this would be a bit of a death knell for the UCP caucus.
Barry, on that point, is this a conversation an elected member of the legislature should be engaging in? What kind of precedent might this set?
Well, I don't think under normal conditions this is. You're a member of the governing party. You take an oath to uphold the laws of the province and the country. And for a member to feel like they can, espouse a separatist viewpoint, it kind of flies in the face of why did you become an MLA in the first place? If you don't like the conditions of being in Canada, it doesn't makes little sense. And I think Jim makes a good point. This is like these little cracks and fissures are opening. You allow this element to be more open and transparent and in public in your caucus, whether it's your constituency presidents or your members or people showing up at your convention and espousing those views. and it's allowed to be out there, these cracks become bigger and bigger. And I think this is a danger for the UCP and for Danielle Smith's leadership. You certainly understand it from an internal perspective why she's trying to keep the coalition together. But when it flies in the face of what she's saying publicly about being part of Canada, it's a difficult group to keep together.
Jim, to pick up on some of your earlier points, should Albertans now have an expectation of others within the UCP caucus to step up and express their own stance on the separation petition and whether or not the issue should go to a referendum?
Yes, this is kind of reminiscent of the 2012 election where where the Wild Rose was at the top of every poll that was done showed that the Wild Rose would be the next government until we had the bozo eruptions, if you remember, the Lake of Fire issue and these white supremacist comment. And the premier stood and said, we are a big open party. We can accept these kind of criticisms and changes and opinions within it. And they, of course, subsequently lost the election to Mrs. Redford. And, I think we can see the same kind of thing happening here if others come forward and they simply say, well, the premier said we were allowed to do this. We saw it under Jason Kenney, and he had to eventually remove 2 of the members from the caucus in order to make the point that we have caucus discipline. If you don't want to adhere to the caucus discipline, there's the door. And I think that's an important stand that every party has to make, no matter how open and free you want to say you are. If your members do not support the basic premises of what you believe in, then you're not really a united party at all.
All right, one more topic for us, and that's the pending launch of Artemis 2, a crew of 4, including Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen, will be the first to embark on a mission to orbit the moon in more than 5 decades. Barry, we heard from Dr. Shauna Pandya off the top. There was a time when the Apollo moon missions captivated the world, and there was a global unifying element to that. What's the potential for that to be repeated in the here and now?
Well, I think it is very, very possible. I think it was really fun to watch Dr. Pandya kind of respond to some of the questions, because it is an aspirational mission. The whole idea of pulling countries, different people together from different parts of the world to kind of meet these otherworldly now opportunities and challenges is pretty exciting, and it speaks to the positive of humankind. And I think it does have the ability to kind of pull us together and cheer for one thing. It's long overdue considering what's going on right now.
Jim, humankind venturing back out into space, reaching again for the moon. What do you make of the significance of the moment and the impact it could have on global dynamics?
Yes, it's really tremendous. It's great to see it back again. And, I think society was getting sick of watching billionaires take runs up into space so they could come back after spending millions of dollars doing it and make some kind of claims of being astronauts. When here we see the real astronauts, the scientists, the science behind it, and taking, extensive risks in order to advance society and our position in the world. And I think it's inspirational. I'm tired of watching billionaires think that they're astronauts by flipping up in one of the commercial flights that they've had available in the past.
All right, it'll be exciting to see if, in fact, the rocket takes off tomorrow. Gentlemen, we have to leave it there. We're out of time. Great to see you both. Thank you for this.
Thank you,
Michael. Thanks, Barry.
Now, here are a few responses to a recent story posted by CTV News about the Smith government calling for constitutional amendments to give the province a say in Superior Court appointments. Faye writes, what are the actual grievances with the current system? What harm are they alleging requires the system to change? That's what I want to know. Fo thinks the Canadian justice system is a totally and utterly failed system. Ken says the UCP cannot change the Constitution. They bluster and fluster to distract from the emerging healthcare contract scandal, but it's just obnoxious noise. Scott writes, this is an excellent move. When your judges want to become your rulers, it's time to remind them who they work for. Have your say. Email us anytime at comments@albertaprimetime.com. Coming up tomorrow with Avi Lewis, now at the helm of the federal NDP, how far can the provincial party distance itself from contentious policy discussions? We will ask Alberta NDP leader Naheed Nenshi on Wednesday. Until then, have a great evening, everyone, from all of us at Alberta Primetime. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time.